Chapter 32. A date long overdue. In the meanwhile, Vorgok gathered a group of the toughest Brass Legion men he could muster and headed on an expedition into the screaming jungle in eastern Sargava. He still remembered the horrible and enormous shapeless thing, covered in teeth that spat other shapeless things covered in teeth he had discovered during his time as the Pain Fairy. And he had all the intention of building a battle arena with that thing, or at least throw it on the Pact Masters should they come back. Teleportation could only get him so far, as casting powerful spells in Mwangi territory could anger the wrong guys. So he took the skyship and spent the next 3 weeks flying above or cutting through jungle, tigers, talking apes, and juju monsters. Eventually, though, they made it through and using the last bits of terror dust managed to track the aberration which was hidden at the bottom of a temple dedicated to a forgotten blood god. After literally wrestling the horror down, Vorgok cut it into manageable pieces, loaded them inside steel boxes, and locked as many of them as he could into a ship. The barbarian had noticed the creature reformed whenever he or his men cut it down, so he figured it would be able to patch itself up once they unloaded it back home. Back in Saltspit, workers had been turning the deepest slave pit into a battle arena. The poor sods that had lived there had been sent to the pit next door, which was so crowded now people died in their sleep from being suffocated, and the slave masters had so many problems moving them through they ended up building a ramp and throwing slaves inside, then picking them up with a series of cranes and nets. Human resources at its finest. So when Vorgok returned, they hauled the bones inside. The arena itself was not finished, but they had already converted some of the tunnels into holding pens, deep enough that Vorgok hoped to be able to contain the monster. So, one by one, he stood on the edge of the holding pen, opened the boxes with a hammer, and quickly tossed the gargling monstrosities inside, which began fusing with one another as they piled up. Rahim showed up and asked Vorgok if it wouldn't be easier to keep the parts separated rather than recreating the massive monster right in the middle of the city. The barbarian thought it a capital idea, so he jumped into the holding pen and wrestled the thing into submission once again, chopped it down and boxed it back. After the workers had finished preparing some more pens, he divided the boxes into 5 groups and left the content evenly split. 5 large horrible abominations were easier to contain than one enormous one after all. Once it became operational, the arena became a centerpiece of Saltspit, gathering huge crowds to witness the bloody and spectacular encounters. Hassan pressed for the income generated from bets to be destined to the Department of Public Works, which among other things had devised primitive sewage systems for the city that drained directly into the horror's pits. As they found out, the thing consumed pretty much anything thrown at it, and as long as they kept burning it partially once a week they could avoid it growing out of control. Eventually a garbage and rubble disposal facility was erected next to the arena with everything from broken tools to dead bodies being handed over to Monsieur Magnetout, as they eventually named the thing. Vorgok supposedly could differentiate between all 5 versions of Magnetout, but I wasn't quite convinced. This led to the creation of a garbage collection crew which had both the task of cleaning up the city and regularly setting Magnetout on fire, which subsequently increased Saltspit's life quality and rate of disappearing bodies. With the city swelling at a continuously faster rate ever since Katapesh went into economic crisis and immigration exploded, even the generally carefree STC saw it necessary to start giving the place some kind of infrastructure. Chapter 33. A penny for your thoughts. The Department of Public Works was given a budget of 400,000 gold pieces per month. Assuming at least half of it would be stolen somewhere in the chain of corruption, 200,000 gold pieces seemed enough to get the place running smoothly and then some. Streets were getting paved, a public hospital was built and put in charge of the Church of Desna. The Brass Legion got a permanent headquarters made out of actual stone with more latrines than anyone could ever need. And there was a brief experiment about using the noxious fumes from the sewers to empower a gaslight system. But after setting the entire neighborhood on fire, it was determined that simply hiring torchbearers to light up the heavy lamps during nighttime was more effective. By this time, the coinworks managed to reach full capacity, with the equivalent of 800,000 gold pieces a day being processed. Due to the logistical complications of minting so many coins, most of it was poured into molds, and set into 10-foot-tall blocks of solid gold, which was then transported to the vaults beneath the palace. At around £16,000 of gold per day, though, even the most enthusiastic estimations grew short. There was simply too much money being produced, and increasingly less room to keep it. I remember asking the group if they really cared about keeping it all safe, considering that they had a virtually infinite supply. The looks they gave me clearly indicated the scale of their greed. So plans to build a monumental vault system were laid out and almost immediately included a flooding system for gondola trips. As wondrous as the vault plans were, they would still need some serious protection. Valinar had the idea of binding outsiders to act as guards. The first attempt was a disaster, accidentally letting loose a demon with too many G's and Z's in its name to be pronounceable, which they managed to stop by showering it with a bucket of mercurial water. The demon melted down into a humanoid form that, among tears, could not stop thanking the party for washing away its sins and pledged its life into their service should they choose. The ka-ching noise thoughts in Hassan's head were almost audible. "We are so monetizing this right now.